Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Augusta F. Smallshaw, 1986, Part 1. This was originally published as Smallshaw Family Memories Collection, or SFMC number 1, published on July 10th, 1988. This was an interview on September 3rd, 1986, in Rocky River, Ohio, with Augusta Lillian Fisher Smallshaw, my grandmother, my mother's mother. What are your thoughts today, Mrs. Smallshaw?
I beg your pardon?
What are your thoughts today?
My thoughts are with the day my daughter left to go away from home, just a few months past her 18th birthday, and she was going about 200 or 300 miles away from home to teach school. I told her, Ruth, if you stay close to your church and live up to the 10 Commandments, you'll always be all right. When my mother and father, an older sister, and younger brother came from England in 1903, my dad had a nice house built, and just behind the house and around the other side of the bluff, there was quite a steep hill, and some of the natives of Canada, of Saskatchewan, showed my father how to make a dugout, because mother couldn't drink tea without milk in it, and so Dad bought a cow and a horse to go and ride about 3 miles to get our mail at the Verna post office. It was before Saskatchewan was named. When we first came to Canada, we lived in what is now Saskatchewan, but then it was the Northwest Territories, and our mail came from England addressed our name, Verna Post Office, NWT, Canada. Then after we'd been here 2 years, 1905, the province was named Saskatchewan. And Saskatchewan is an Indian word, a Cree Indian word, and it means rushing water, because there's the long Saskatchewan River, and it has some very rough, rugged water. So the Indian name for Saskatchewan is rushing water. Anyway, Dad got some men to show him how to make a dugout stable in the side of the hill, and they did, and there were 2 stalls in it, and they had lumber or poles to make the stalls. Dad bought a horse and then a cow, and then we got some chickens, and this was in the side of the hill, and they built halfway down the side of the hill into this dugout a little square window. And after the winter, when the spring came, Dad took the horse out for sunshine and fresh air and put it on a tether. And I guess the cow was likely the same, only in a pasture. And then he closed the door. During the night, a skunk came down the hill and jumped in the window. Must have dropped about 8 or 10 feet. And the chickens were still in there. And this skunk jumped around and frightened the chickens and caught them one by one. And I think there were 3 left out of about 12 or 15. And he'd take them by the neck and suck the blood out of them. When Dad went to let the chickens out, nearly all of them were dead on the floor. And there was a skunk in the stable. And when Dad opened the door, he got into the corner, and Dad tried to chase the skunk out. When he was cornered, he turned around and he sprayed my dad and the whole stable. Dad was just about suffocated, and he came home smelling like skunks. Ha ha ha! It was terrible, and Mother was so worried, and the natives there said, "You'll never get it out of your clothes. You'll have to take them off and bury them." Well, it took us a long time to get rid of the odor of the skunks. Dad had sent to a big mail-order house in Winnipeg that we got nearly everything from, and Dad had sent for a shotgun, because the wolves used to come and jump up to our beef. Dad had 2 big posts and a post along the top and a pulley, and we'd buy half an animal, half a beef, and we'd pull it up there and let it down to cut some off. That was our refrigeration. And we woke up one morning and there was, yep, 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 yep. And here it was, the prairie wolves jumping up to get the meat. They had the bottom part of our meat all shredded. Anyway, Dad went back to the dugout and closed the door, and he shot the skunk with the shotgun. But that didn't take the odor away. That was our experience with the skunk. They're such pretty little things. Some people say, "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty." They don't know that they're skunks because they're so pretty, with a lovely big fluffy tail. And then we woke up one morning and there were these wolves, and they wouldn't go away, because they knew we didn't have a gun at that time. That's why Dad sent to Eaton's for the gun. After he got it, he shot it off. After that, we didn't have any more trouble with the wolves. They knew there was a gun in the place. Tell me about when you had your little kids. What was it like when Ruth and Bud were little kids? Well, to me, they were the most wonderful children in the world. Ruth was a very plump little girl and very easy to get along with, very easy to raise. When she was 3 years old, my husband had the newspaper in Yellowgrass, about 60 miles south of Regina, called the Yellowgrass Herald. He was a very clever man. He was still just in his 20s when he edited and ran the Yellowgrass Herald. We lived in Yellowgrass, a small town of about 500 people. I had come from London, England, and lived on the homestead for about 12 years. When I was in my teens in 1917, my dad passed away, and I went to live with my older sister in Regina. I took a business course and got a position right away. When I was in my early 20s, I met George Smallshaw. He worked for the Leader Post in Regina at that time. After I worked in Regina for a while, I decided to go to Winnipeg. My only brother had come back from overseas, the First World War, and he was in Winnipeg. So I went to stay with him and his wife for a few months until I got a place of my own. I had a position there, and one of the boys used to go out with in Regina came to Winnipeg, and this was George Smallshaw. When we were there, he got a job with a Wilson stationery, and we got married and had 2 children. When I knew I was going to have Ruth, I wanted to go to England to visit my half-sister. That was in 1924. We left Winnipeg April 30th, 1924, and we stayed in England and traveled all over England, visiting my people and my husband's people for all that summer. We came back about 6 weeks before the baby was to be born. I was going to have the baby in Winnipeg, but my husband went west to buy a newspaper, and he went home to his mother and dad's in Estevan. And when he got there, his mother said, "When's the baby to be born?" He said, "Oh, about the 19th of September." And she said, "Is she going to have the baby all alone in Winnipeg?" And he said, "Oh, I guess so." And she said, "Oh, no, she's not. She's going to come here." So they phoned and asked me to come to Estevan for the baby to be born. And that's where she was born. In the meantime, my husband bought the Yellowgrass Herald, and we went to live in Yellowgrass when Ruth was a few months old. When she was 3 years old, I had a birthday party for her, and I asked my husband's mother and a friend of hers to come up from Estevan. Yellowgrass was about halfway between Estevan and Regina. So I had this birthday for Ruth, and about that time, I knew I was going to have another baby. I had this darling little girl with lovely auburn hair, and I loved her more than life itself. Anyway, when I knew I was going to have another baby, I wanted a boy. And I didn't like boys with red hair with freckles. I wanted a boy with dark hair, and I wanted him to be tall. So I had a neighbor across the street. She belonged to the Church of Christ. She was a very good-living woman. I told her what my prayers were, that I would have a boy, that he wouldn't have red hair, and that he would grow to be tall. And she said, "Well, Mrs. Smallshaw, they say a good woman's prayers are answered." I was going to Regina for the baby to be born, and she said, "When you come back from Regina, we'll know whether you're a good woman or not." Anyway, I did have a baby boy, and he didn't have red hair, and he's grown to be over 6 feet tall. So I guess according to Mrs. Pagan, she considered me to be a good woman. Ha ha ha. I never told you that before, did I? What was it like raising your 2 children? Well, when I was in the hospital, the lady in the next bed had nerve trouble. Her parents were divorced, and she had nerve trouble. She went out of her mind, and she had a wonderful husband who came to see her every day. He was so worried about her. She went out of her mind. They call it childbirth nerves or something like that. and her husband was so considerate. She nearly sent me crazy, too. She was always jumping out of bed, and I'd had such a hard time bringing my son into the world. Her husband's name was Florent, and I thought he was such a nice fellow, so I named my baby Florent after him. My husband thought I was crazy, but I liked it. I named him Herbert after my father, and George after his father and his grandfather. So his name was and is Florent Herbert George Smallshaw, which is quite a hand, and it's something he says he has to live with. When he was a little boy, my husband got a chance to sell the newspaper in Yellowgrass, and I didn't like living in a small town. You go for a walk and you go 2 or 3 blocks and you'd be out on the prairie, and I hated it there. Anyway, my husband got in with a bunch of fellows that had just gotten back from the First World War, most of them in their 20s, and they used to have a little card party every night and play poker. My husband would go out in the evening and play with them, and I got very lonesome, and I wanted to go back in Regina where I had some friends. My husband got a chance to sell the Yellowgrass Herald. We'd been there about 3 or 4 years, and I hated the small town. The people thought I was terrible, although I made some very good friends there. Anyway, Mr. Piddler wanted to buy a newspaper. He talked to me about it and said, "I'm cashing in all my insurance to buy this newspaper. Do you think it'll be a success?" And I said, "Yes, I think it will. If you belong to the church and are in with the crowd, I think you'll be all right." Anyway, we moved to Regina and bought a big 8-room house on Cameron Street, 1528 Cameron Street. That's where my children were brought up. My son was a little bit harder to make behave than my daughter was, but they were just lovely, lovely children, and I adored them. I spent most of my time trying to teach them manners and how to live a good life, and they've turned out to be very wonderful people, I think.
What were Ruth and Bud like when they were teenagers?
Ruth was a very good student, and I never had any trouble getting her to do her homework. She always schemed to get 100 in her exams. Bud was clever, but he was a lazy student, and I was always worried about him, trying to get him to do his homework and to bed at night. He said,
"Dear old Ruth, she always aims for 100. I aim for 51, just to pass, and I have a good time."
And he did. He had a lot of friends wherever he went. When he was a little boy at 1528 Cameron Street, we were there for 11 years. He had a lot of boyfriends. It was a nice district for the kids to play in, because there were a lot of houses, and the kids used to play between the houses. They really had a lot of fun. He seemed to be the leader of the gang. He wouldn't come in for his meals. He had such a lovely time with the boys, and I used to worry about him not getting enough to eat. I'd say, "Bud, come in and have something to eat. You've been playing there for hours." And he'd say, "If I come in, I'll lose the crowd," because they would disappear if he wasn't there to lead them. He was a leader. I'd say, "You have to have something to eat. You haven't had anything to eat for a long time." He said,
"Well, make me a peanut butter sandwich, and I'll eat it on the wing." Ha, ha, ha. What about Ruth? What was she like as she got older?
As she got older, I never had one day's worry with Ruth going out with the boys. She was always very sensible. I've heard that some women go through agonies when their daughters are growing up, going out with the boys for fear they'd get in trouble. But I was very, very fortunate. I never had one day's worry with Ruth. I could trust her. I knew if she went to a dance, she'd be all right. She went to Scott Collegiate. Ruth went through public school called Albert School, very close to where we lived. And then she went to Scott Collegiate for 4 years. And Bud went to Albert School for 4 years, and then we moved. The Depression came along, and my husband got laid off at the leader post. We had put about $2,000 into our 1528 Cameron Street house, and the mortgage people foreclosed, and my husband was very bitter about losing that $2,000. But it didn't bother me because it was a big house, and it had 8 rooms, and it was very hard on me, going upstairs, looking after the children when they had the mumps and the measles and chicken pox and all the children's diseases. I was up and downstairs and up and downstairs, and I got very, very run down, played out. Anyway, when Bud was 11 and Ruth was in grade 9, we had to leave the place and pack up. It was a big place, and we collected a lot of stuff in 11 years. I borrowed money on my husband's life insurance and bought a small house, 1257 Wascana Street, and we moved there. I said to Ruth, "You'll have to take a few days off school and help me pack up and move because I'm feeling very, very tired, and your dad won't help me." He was working part-time then, and he said that the moving job was up to me. I felt I couldn't do it alone. So Bud was very domestic, and he was simply wonderful. I couldn't have hired a woman to help me better than Bud did. He was just 11. He helped me get big boxes and put different things in and label them, and he was really wonderful. Bud was more domestic than Ruth. Ruth was always more of a career girl. I'd say, "Ruth, come on, I want to teach you how to cook and clean house." And she'd say, "Oh, I'm not going to learn to cook. I'm going to marry a rich man and have a maid to do that." But Bud was always more domestic, and if he got a cold and had to be away from school for more than a few days, he never wanted to go back. Not that he didn't like school. He didn't like to face the public again. He'd say, "If you let me stay home today, I'll paint the kitchen for you." As I said, he didn't want to face the world again. I'd say, "Bud, your job is to go to school. My job is to do this housework." And that way he went back. What did Ruth do in her free time in high school? She was a good student, and she had some girlfriends, and I persuaded her to buy a bicycle with her money she had in the bank. She bought a bicycle, and she used to go bike riding with her girlfriends. She didn't want to take the money out of the bank. You could buy a new bike then for about $10 or $15. Bud was very jealous of this sister with the new bike, so he wouldn't give me any peace until he got a bike of his own. He didn't have enough money in the bank to buy a new one. He'd look in the newspaper, and he got me up one morning at 6 o'clock a.m. to go look at a second-hand bicycle that was advertised, and we bought it. So they both had bicycles. What was it like after Ruth left home? Did you miss her a lot? Well, naturally, I really missed her terribly. When she was going to normal school, they call it teacher college now. Well, to back up, as she was growing up, every time she got cold, she'd get a mastoid, and I had to have the doctor. Nearly lost her several times, poor little girl. It's an awful thing. A Dr. Graham and a Dr. McCusker looked after her, and I really thank Dr. McCusker for the rest of my life and his life. He was an ear specialist, and he saved her life. She had one operation, and it was turning bad, and he came to see her, and he said, "This child is dying." He wrapped her up in a quilt, and it was a very cold east wind. He took her in his car to the hospital and operated on her for the second time. That saved her life. So I was very, very grateful to Dr. McCusker. The Depression was on, and my husband was just earning $10 a week for me to buy groceries for 4 people. And I said to Dr. McCusker, "How am I going to pay you?" I guess he realized how terrible I felt, and he never sent me a bill. It must have been hundreds of dollars. So I felt very, very fortunate. He saved my daughter's life. Now every time my son would get cold, he'd get pneumonia. So I had quite a time keeping them alive, at least I thought. But they both lived, and answered to my prayers that they both lived, and they're both alive today. I always prayed that I'd die before they did. I was a big coward, didn't want to lose them. What do you remember about your husband? He was very, very loving, clever, and a musician. He was the oldest boy, his mother's favorite. He was very, very affectionate. He was very emotional, fly into a temper very quickly. That was very hard on me because my dad was a very even-tempered man. I never saw him fly into a temper like my husband did. He seemed like he loved me an awful lot, and the children. He was a musician, played in the symphony. George was able to play for dances when he was 15, he told me. We got married in our early 20s, and we celebrated our 60th wedding anniversary. Eventually, he took a stroke and was in a nursing home. When he was in the nursing home, he tried to get out several times. I asked him where he was going when he got out. He said that he didn't know, but he hated the nursing home, and he wanted to get the hell out of that nursing home. So they put him in a part of the nursing home where the patients can't get away. They call it 3 West. The nurses have their offices right in front of the elevator, and the stairs are closed off. Now I had bought a new car. The car we had was quite a big car. Our garage we had was rather old-fashioned, and it was very hard for me to get the car in the garage because there was only about 2 inches on each side. I was always shaky after I got in for fear I'd take the sides out. So I sold it and bought a new Volkswagen Rabbit, cashed in my bonds to buy it. My son was a chartered accountant at that time, and he hated to see me cash in my bonds because they were getting such good interest, 10%, 12%. I said, "Bud, I can enjoy the car now. I can't take the bonds with me, so I'm cashing them in to buy a car, at least some of them." And I had a lot of fun. I used to drive up to the nursing home 2 or 3 times a week, every Sunday. When the children were growing up, my husband never went to church with me. A lady across the street thought I was a widow because I came to church with 2 little kiddies and never a husband. But after my husband got in the nursing home, he wanted to go to church every day. Why do you think that is? He knew that it was the 11th hour, I guess. His people were very strict Baptists, and he was brought up that way, and some of it stayed with him. He didn't drink, but he did like to play poker, which was hard on the family. But after he got in the nursing home, I think he was very remorseful. I would go up there, and he would cry a lot. I would read to him. I would read daily word books to him. I'd go up Wednesdays, and he didn't know Wednesdays from any other day, and he'd say, "Are you going to take me to church today?" I'd say, "No, this is Wednesday, but I'll come up on Sunday and take you to church." My dad was Anglican. In the States, it's Episcopalian. So I was confirmed and went to the Anglican Church, St. Peter's Church. Both of my children were confirmed there. We all took communion there, but my husband's people were Baptists, and he was never confirmed. When he was in the nursing home, they had a communion service in the nursing home, and he wanted to take communion. I really didn't know quite what to do, because he hadn't been confirmed. He had learned all the articles of the Christian faith to be confirmed. I imagine he knew the Lord's Prayer and the 10 Commandments, but he hadn't been confirmed. So I went to my minister, Canon Turnbull, and I said, "Canon Turnbull, George wants to take communion. He hasn't been confirmed. What shall I do?" He said, "Oh, Mrs. Smallshaw, you let him take communion. It's the 11th hour. If he feels like he wants to take communion, you let him." To be continued. Well, that concludes today's presentation. Augusta F. Smallshaw, 1986, Part 1. Good luck to you with your efforts in family history, if this interests you. Finding, preserving, and sharing old letters, diaries, and photographs, and interviewing elderly relatives while they're alive. You might consider checking out our website, Adventures in History, with Peter J. Ray, at peterjray.com. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care. And I'll see you next time.